Welcome everybody to the Customer Online Workshop for DDM Release 2023. We're only going to cover the highlights in this workshop, and we're looking at all of the enhancements between 2022.06 and the 2023.03. Everybody should have had access to this workbook, and just to show you, against each enhancement, if I scroll down, there should be a box where you can scribble comments or notes and things, so that as we're covering the topics, if there's anything you want to come back to us on afterwards or have more information on, then you can use this for scribbling, etc. Okay, I'm going to close this document because what I've done is I've raised a job within my demonstration environment, my DDM, and so the workshops, just to mention the workshops that we do on a monthly basis, I believe they're worth attending. It's certainly valuable to us because we get lots of good feedback and interaction with the customer. We've covered the category browser, access controls not as owner, importing via a CSV file, the bulk editor in CAD Rename, which we're going to touch on again today, what business units is all about, color coding attributes, and searching. So these are the focus topics that we've covered to date, and we're going to continue to do that on a monthly basis. This month is all about the DDM Release 2023-03. Now, what I've done is I've created a set of actions. So if I open this folder, noting how quickly the folder opens, rather than working through the Word document, I've created these as tasks for me to step through as I do the demonstration. The first one in your workbook should be 9218. So if any of this isn't in line, Darren, let me know. So the first enhancement, 9218, is adding additional attributes at an administration level. So I'm going to go into the DDM admin tool under Tools Administration, and I'm going to log in. Okay, if I go under Users, and I choose, let's say, Joe.McBurney as a user, then we have these additional fields on the lower section of the window where you can now enter people's job title, the company name, the department, and a contact detail if you want to. Okay, they're optional fields, but they're very useful for bigger organizations, so that if you don't know everybody or every department that they're in, it becomes very useful. And we'll have a look at using that information or where it's displayed in the DDM Office environment on a later enhancement. But it's a pretty simple and straightforward on 4 new attributes for holding additional information against the users. Okay, the next enhancement, 9280, would like default system groups renamed to more meaningful names. Came in as a request, and if we go back into the DDM administration tool, if you go under groups, and the thing with groups is we've had hard-coded groups from the beginning. So since 1996, we've had hard-coded groups for specific functionality, and we're adding new ones now, but we're also unpicking some of the ones that we had in the past. But because these groups had random names, they weren't grouped together in the admin tool. So when you do have an upgrade, you'll see here, if I can select all of them, we're now renaming the groups that we control that we've hard coded, and we're prefixing them with the word power group. So, and there's also an explanation as to what that group is. So bulk item editors, category administrators and managers, item number editors. This previously was called a group called designers, which wasn't particularly clear. So we've renamed that. Any member of this group is allowed to change the name or the number of an item. Master sibling administrations, unless you're involved in that, I would ignore it. Rename manager super users, rename manager users, replacing manager. What we've also done here is the system groups for administrators, web users, domain users, and restricted users, we've prefixed with the word system group. So when you move to 2023.03, those groups will automatically be renamed in your system, it makes administration a lot easier. What I would say is, because they are hard-coded groups, I would not use these for setting your access controls, because these groups are for a specific function. So just a top tip, whereas your departments, or the way I certainly have my DDM set up, is by department, and then my access controls for my parts, assemblies, drawings and documents, I have these item-based access control groups as well. So just a top tip there. So the enhancement is renaming the hard-coded system groups to make them a little bit more understandable. Okay, let me just set this as we've covered that. Okay, the next enhancement is related to the data import tool. And I will preamble a little bit on this because we're gaining more and more customers as time goes on. I guess, you know, things are spreading and growing quite well. And you know, it became obvious to us that the big challenge for most companies is dealing with legacy data that isn't particularly good data. We do lots of imports from the Windows file system, and we do lots of migrations from other databases. I don't think I'm wrong in pointing out that 10 to 30% of the data that we deal with is either duplicate information or with missing relationships. So, you know, historically trying to manage this is very difficult, and hence the reason why people are moving towards DDM, whether that's from Windows or one of the other solutions on the market. So we've had a really big focus on the import side of things, but also on the power tools that we're providing to help you manage and amend and get the data sorted out once it's into DDM. You know, how do we get to a good place? We've got to provide the tools to help you get there. So this particular example is anybody who's a SolidWorks user, you're probably familiar with the SolidWorks toolbox. The toolbox creates a particular type of SolidWorks file, and if it's recognized as a toolbox file, then every time you load your part or assembly, it will look to the toolbox for that information. You know, the toolbox is a very useful tool, but over the years there have been instances where things have messed up a little bit in the toolbox, or you load a 5mm washer and it comes out as a 5-meter washer and things. These things happen. So our recommendation is always to use the toolbox as the shop. If you don't already have the files inside DDM, go to the toolbox, get the geometry that you want, and bring it into DDM. But we're giving you the ability on import to convert a toolbox file into a non-toolbox file. So this is something I'm going to demonstrate. I'm going to go to my data import tool. So DDM data import. I'm going to log in as the administrator. I'll accept the liability. Anybody not familiar with this already, it's a very powerful tool and therefore potentially dangerous. If you drive the car off the cliff, it's not our fault. So we have to get you to accept this liability. Okay. So, SolidWorks 2023. I'm looking for information from the Windows file system, and I've created a folder here for washers. Okay. So I want to analyze that data. Okay. Start the analysis. So this tool is analyzing the 17 files that it's found. It found 17 files in 1 second. We didn't find any problems. These parts do not exist in DDM, but all of the files are SolidWorks toolbox files, and we now warn you that these will be converted into standard files at the point of import. So I'm going to close this dialog. I'm going to go to the import wizard. We're importing part information only. I'm not going to reserve the information to a folder. We're going to give everything an automatic number. And these are the parameters that we're mapping. Now what I should have done, I am going to backtrack. I'm going to load my import mapping configuration, which is in Data Import, CAD, SolidWorks, Toolbox Parts. This is my import definition file. So the mapping is correct. Let me go back through the import wizard. Apologies for that. Okay, next, next, next. So the mapping is now correct, where you map the attributes on the files to the parameters within inside DDM. We're going to import the information into this particular category. Next, these are the files that we're about to import. Okay, and if I import the data now, you can see I'm renaming the part numbers on their way in. It can either use the existing numbers or rename on the way in. So I'm going to close this off now, close the import tool, and I'm going to start SolidWorks. And the way to test this is I will open a clean blank assembly and load one of our new parts into the assembly, and it should see it as a standard SolidWorks part, not as a toolbox part. Okay, so I'm in SolidWorks. I'm going to create a blank assembly. Okay. I will go to my... I've broken something. Oh, I think I know what I've done. Yeah, I know what I've done. Fortunately, I don't need this. PDM integrator, load subpart. No, I've broken my menu. Damn. Okay, well, any SolidWorks users will know that when you load a SolidWorks part, if it's a toolbox part, it has a like a bolt symbol, not the standard SolidWorks symbol, and that's what you will end up seeing. Okay, so I'm going to quickly move on because clearly I've broken something on my machine.
And if anybody wants to cover that on another call, we can.
Yeah, I know what I've done. I know what I've done. I apologise because mine's a development machine and I play around with lots of things. I know what I've done there. Okay, so that enhancement, which is 9357, is the ability to automatically convert SolidWorks toolbox parts into standard parts. There is also a process for anybody who's interested in that. There is a process to show you how to go to the toolbox, apply parameters, and import the data. So if anybody's interested in that, do drop us an email and maybe I'll create a little video to show you that will be better than today's demonstration. Right, I'm going to set that as complete. And let's move on to the next item. So enhancement 9240, folders and workflow. Would like XML output generated for folders and their contents driven by the workflow. So we've always had the ability to send XML information out to a predefined location. An example of why you would want to do that is if you want to migrate data into an ERP system, then we do this via an XML file. And the request here was that we want the ability to send folder information out in an XML format as well, so that if a process is triggered from another database like ERP, as we're moving through the process in DDM, we might want to send updates to ERP to know where we are as a status of the process or additional information. So my example of that is I'm going to look for change order 720. I go back to the main DDM interface and I look at my change orders, 760 should I say. Now this particular change order, I'm going to look at my process. I've got switched on at an admin level for this process. If I go to the admin tool, let me bring this over here, and I go to my folders. Let's go to workflow. And while I do that, I'm just going to minimize that window. So my change order workflow at the point of change request approval. So this can be configured for any step in a workflow send folder XML information to EUM on arrival. So on arriving at this step, we will send information about the folder and its contents to a predefined location that can be picked up by another system. Okay, so if I go back to my workflow here now, on the server, again, for anybody who's not familiar with it, this is my DDM server. So on my DDM server, if I go to my EUM output folder, I'm going to clear the other data that I've had in there, like so. So I have 3 things in this folder, and if I send this for change request approval, I'm going to send it to an engineering manager. I'm going to send it forward to, I'll send it to myself. So on arriving at this step in the workflow, we will send out an XML file. If I go back to the server, then anytime just after a minute, because there's a timer in the background that looks at it, and we can see here that it's already arrived, is the change order number as an XML file. And if I open this file, hopefully you can all read this. Let me just collapse. If I fold all, so output, what triggered it was this workflow and the step that it was at. Then we've got the folder attribute, so all of the folder attributes here, that will also include any custom attributes that you might have added yourself. And the XML file also includes any item information and any subfolder information as well. There's not a lot in this one. So basically, XML output on arriving at a step in a workflow based on the folder attributes and the folder content attributes that includes any item or subfolder. Okay, delete. Go back to DDM and go back to our list of enhancements. So let me put that down as complete. The next enhancement is 9490. Would like workflow XML option to allow adding team members when arriving at a step in a workflow. So a team member is somebody who is allowed to see a folder through the web interface of DDM. I'm going to use my web folder here. I've already prepared, so I've got the number I'm looking for, which is my 768 folder. So if I go to the main DDM interface here and look at my supply chain folders, I've got one here which is my 768 folder. If we look in the bottom of the screen here, I've added an attribute here called company. Okay. Now, I've also added a rule in the background to say that you cannot move forward in the workflow unless you filled in this attribute. Okay, so that's just an XML control. If and I've got the attribute listed as a column in the top window here. So I'm going to choose this. Now I've configured this attribute, the company attribute, as an SQL query on the DDM database to give me any user that is prefixed with the word supplier. Okay, now I'm going to choose this sample supplier as Amazon. So I've now added that information to this field. Now, if we look in the team members here, there are no team members in this folder. Okay. If I move forward in the workflow, the XML rule that we've added gives you the ability to say, I'm moving this forward, I'm going to take control as a purchasing person, keep it to myself. As that moves forward, what it does is it reads the information in here, finds that user, and it adds them as a team member to the folder, so that person can now see the folder in the web environment. So really useful when you're managing supplier and customer folders where you need to obviously make the folder available to people. We showed this on a previous one, so if anybody is interested in that and would like the example XML code to make that happen, then do let us know. Okay, Let me set this one as complete. Okay. Enhancement 9418 for folders and workflow. When selecting a group member on sending through a folder, let's see some additional information. So I showed this in an administration level earlier. I do think it's very useful information. Now, what I'm going to do here is use the example of assigning this parent folder. If I choose to assign this to somebody else, I'm assigning it within the owner group, which is engineering. And now if you look at the user information in the bottom half of the window, we can see that in addition to name and surname, we can see email address, job title, company and department, which is really quite useful. Okay, let me cancel that. So a simple enhancement, but a very useful one. I will set that to complete. Enhancement 7464. Bulk item editor. We have covered this on a topic workshop. It's definitely worth recapping on because it's a very powerful tool and very, very useful. I'm going to use the example of a barrier Schottky diode. Okay. Now, if I go into DDM, I'm going to use my category browser to look for a part that is purchased. It's an electrical part. I'm looking for a diode, and I want to see the barrier diodes. Okay, I'm going to minimize my navigation panel. So what I have here is all of these items that I've got here are released. And everybody should be familiar with, if something is released, it's not available for modification. But what if we want to change something that isn't changing the item? Okay, we don't want to have to reserve the item, roll the status back, re-release it, etc. So this tool that is subject to being a member, let me show you in the admin tool. In order to use this tool, you need to be in the special group that is called Bulk Item Editors, and it's one of the power groups. So if I look at power groups, we've got a new one called Bulk Item Editors. You have to be in the group, and you also have to be in the group relative to business unit as well. So the business unit rules apply to all of the things that I'm showing you today. So bulk item editors, if you are a member of this group, because you wouldn't want everybody being allowed to do these things. Let's say I've got an attribute here for who is the supplier. Okay, and let's say, is this item, let's say, ROSH compliant? They're just examples. I've got two new, so RS Components is the current supplier, and let's say we want to select all of these. You can single or multi-select. I'm going to select all, and I can now right-click and bulk edit. It's a Boolean-based tool, so I could say change the supplier, because we're now purchasing all of these from AHC Camberley, and we want to change the ROSH compliance. Is it ROSH compliant? Yes. So I could go on and add lots more changes that I want to make. I'm going to remove these. There's also some cautionary comments in here that are well worth reading. Clearly we're doing something that some could argue that we're breaking the rules of a released item, but I'm making a change here that isn't changing the item. I might be changing how we find it or additional supplementary information about it. You have to enter your password to prove that it was you. So if I say OK, what we now have is these are all ROSH compliant, and they're all supplied by AHC in Camberley. If I select one of these items and look at the audit trail, we can see that we did a bulk edit, and we've changed the supplier from RS Components to AHC Camberley, and quite stupidly I've changed the ROSH compliance from yes to yes, but you get the idea. Now a good example of where you might want to use this is you'll see here that we've got a column switched on called preferred. Okay, and this column is really just a nice way of indicating as to whether an item is a preferred item or not. Now I might want to set this item Yeah, my item, and I don't know if it's because I'm sharing my screen, but it's gone on a go slow. Okay, I might just want to change this to a non-preferred item. So I can choose bulk edit, pick the preferred attribute, and say, no, put in my password. So not only have I managed to change that, I'm accountable for my actions because it will keep an audit trail on the change that I've made. And as to whether it's preferred or not within the business is not changing the part itself. So the bulk editor, I think, is a really, really good tool. It's well worth looking at. When you take an upgrade, definitely have a look and see if you can find your way around it. Very powerful. Okay, so I'm going to set that one to complete. The next enhancement is the CAD Rename Manager. We've had the CAD rename capability for SolidWorks for a number of years, but it was quite restrictive. So I'm going to use SolidWorks as the first example because we've enhanced the tool for use against SolidWorks. What we then did was we made it work with the other CAD tools as well. So we're starting to bring the functionality for all of the different CAD applications in line because they did evolve over time. Something that we are going to be doing in the near future is all of the neutral files that you can have available generated by DDM when you save from CAD. We're going to align them to make more of them available and more consistent across each CAD application. So things like that, trying to make it consistent. So Rename Manager, SolidWorks. I'm going to pick on a part here. I'm going to search for this part. Just copy the name. Go to DDM. My SolidWorks has been closed. And the reason for that is you must have your CAD application closed before you use this function. And I'm just going to search for the part number that I was looking for. Now, this part number has two issues. The latest issue, issue 2, and an old issue, issue 1. So I'm deliberately showing them all on the screen because if I choose to rename this part, now my ability to rename this part is again because I'm in a power group. Now there are two power groups related to CAD renaming. If you are the owner of the file and it's at a modifiable status, and if you're the owner of any of the parents and they are at a modifiable status, you only need to be in the Rename Manager Users Power Group. If you want the ability to override ownership and access control, you need to be in the Super group. So there's a Rename Manager Super Users group. So two different levels. So you can control, are you allowed to use the tool, and what level you're allowed to use the tool. So I select the item that I'm after, CAD Rename Manager. Warning, there are multiple issues of this item. If you only rename the one that you've selected, that could cause problems in the future. So we need to consider this. Now I am not all parents can be modified. And that tells me I have to be in the super users group, which I am. Okay, so this is the dialog. It shows us the current information in the top grey portion of the window. And we want to rename this. I'm going to use the manual. No, I'm going to give this a one of my default part numbers. Okay, so I want to rename it from this number to this number. Now, the parents are highlighted in red. And that's telling me that I don't have permission to rename these files. I also want to apply this to all issues because it warned me that there was a previous issue. So there's no additional parents, which is good. These two options in the middle here, override reserved by. So I want to override ownership, and I still cannot modify these parents. And that is because their status is blocking me. You can't overwrite a file that's obsolete, released, or superseded, and therefore I also need to overwrite access controls. So it's a very powerful tool, and again, potentially very dangerous in the wrong hands. There are some cautionary notes here that are really important to read. I'm not a fan of reading these things, but in this instance, it's very important. Everything must be reserved back into the database. No copies of files on people's local computers that are out of date, all of those issues. So it's well worth reading these cautionary notes. If I then put in my password, I have to again accept the liability. So if I drive the car off the cliff, it's my fault. I say accept the liability, and what's happening in the background now is it's renaming the part, the previous issue of the part, and it's also editing all of the parents to tell them the new name of that part. If I refresh the screen, we can see that it's disappeared because of what I'm searching on. If I search on description now to bring it back, so if I go to the primary attributes here, copy, and I search by description, it didn't find anything at all, which doesn't make sense to me. Why? Oh, I know why. Doesn't like hyphens. So what we have here is my renamed issue 1 and issue 2. Okay, we didn't rename the drawing because the drawing is a parent, not a child. The drawing has been edited to recognize the new number. If I look at an assembly, so if I look at a parent assembly of this by doing a where used, I can see that this assembly is now looking for my new part number here. So rebuilding those assemblies. Okay, so the enhancement for SolidWorks is making it do all of this more powerful stuff in addition to what it did in the past, and we've got these new super user groups as well. So let's look back at the SolidWorks example. I am going to run through these other examples because the enhancement that we've made is that we can do the CAD rename now on SolidWorks, Creo, Inventor, Solid Edge and IronCAD. So all of the 3D tools that we support. Okay, I'm going to make sure that I'm connected to my VPN because I pick up my Creo license from the network. And hopefully this is going to work, fingers crossed. And the example that we are going to use is part 2113. I'm going to go to the main DDM interface and I'm going to search for 2113, which should be a Creo part. It is. Okay, so 2113, and the latest issue of this is issue 3. Let me just be sure that I'm connected, and I am. So I'm going to do a rename on this part, CAD rename. Okay, the same warnings that we had with SolidWorks. Now you'll have noticed that we're at issue 3, there's an issue 2 and an issue 1, and all of those will have different parents. So I'm going to say I would like to rename this. I'm going to use the manual option because I'm just going to put REN on the end of the number so I can see which one I've done. I'm going to apply to all issues, and we see now that we have more parents because of what we've done. We will override the ownership. We'll also override the access controls. It's all gone black. I need to put in my password, say OK, accept the liability, and it should, the 7 items that need to be modified, it's going to load my Creo and it's going to rename the part and update the parents for me. It's pretty important that while it's doing this, you don't have other things running. You don't want to risk it breaking halfway through. So, you know, it's doing things that would take you a long time to do manually. So please be patient with it. And I'm not going to press any buttons while it's doing its job. Everything has been renamed. If I go back here and I search again, we'll see here that issue 1, 2 and 3 of this item have been renamed. If I look at issue 3 and look at the where used, we can see that it understands what parents it has. Again, for each issue, we can see that the parents understand that relationship as well. Okay, just to be sure, if I look at the part and do a where used, this assembly is now looking for the renamed part so that it will load correctly into Creo. Okay, that is the Creo example of that. Let me set this to complete. The next one is Inventor, and I'm going to use 2399. So, 2399. And one of the key points here is, as I mentioned earlier, is the consistency across all of the applications. We're guilty of having a focus on the more commonly used SolidWorks in the past. So, some of the guys using different CAD tools, possibly felt like the poor relations in the past. And clearly we don't want that. So we're being much more consistent about the CAD side of things. This is the latest issue of the part that I want to rename. CAD Rename, again, the same warnings. I'm going to apply to all issues. There's multiple parents. I'm going to modify the part number using a manual rename. So I'm going to, again, add REN on the end of the number that I'm using. I want to override the access controls, override the ownership, apply to all issues, put in my password, and say OK. And again, it's going to, in the case of Inventor, it doesn't need to load the application each time because it uses the blind version of Inventor. But what we see here is issue 1, 2, 3, and 4 of this part have been renamed, and all parents will have been updated. So what I'd also like to do here is in the audit trail, again, just so that we are accountable for our actions, we've had this renamed. I've done it a few times, as you can see, but it will tell you that on this date at this time, a rename was carried out by Stuart McBurney, and we renamed it from this to this. So who did it, when they did it, and what the change was. You'll also notice here that it did an EUM update straight after. And if I refresh my screen and click on this again, it's now just done another EUM update because this part was previously sent to the ERP system via the XML route, and therefore if we've modified something, we should represent that information to update the ERP system automatically at the same time. Okay, so that's the Inventor rename. I'm going to go back to say complete. The next one I'm going to do is the Solid Edge version of it, which is 4480. I'm going to search for 4480. This one's got many more versions of the item in it. I'm going to pick on issue 11, the latest issue. I'm going to do a CAD rename, same warnings. Let's go across all issues of this, and we'll see now there are many parents that need to be updated. I'm going to override my ownership and access controls, and we're going to rename this item. Again, I'm just going to put a hyphen REN onto this like that. I'm going to put in my password and say OK, accept the liability, and it's now going through renaming all of the items and updating all of the parents. In this case with Solid Edge, it has to load the application to do the work. So again, I'm going to be patient and I'm going to wait for this to happen. We see that it's stepping through row 8, 9. At the bottom in red, we can see what's happening. So all the work has been done. If I refresh my screen, now we can see issue 1 right through to issue 11 have all been renamed and all parents updated. So that's that one. The final one that we want to demonstrate is IronCAD, and I'm going to use 10410. The item that I want to change is 10410. We got 2 different issues of this. Maybe what I should do is, I'm being brave. Apply to both issues. Andy, this is the acid test. Does everybody have their fingers crossed? All right. Shouldn't need to overwrite. If I do this. And they've both been renamed. Proof of the pudding. There you go. It's renamed both. And again, obviously I can do the rename on the part as well. But because the drawing is a parent, it doesn't rename the drawing. It only renames the item that you've chosen. But it would update the drawing if you're renaming the child so it can find the child. Okay. Right, let me set that one as a yes. Complete. We're going to move on to the web client. Enhancement DDMC 5188 is the ability to reserve or reference items into a folder in the web client. And there are 3 enhancements together here. So I will show them one at a time, but they're all kind of related to each other. I'm going to go to the DDM Web Client. In fact, what was I going to be searching on? Hold on. I'm going to search for 2217. So in the web client, I'm logged in as myself. And if I say I'm looking for a part 2217, go and find it for me. So I've got 3 different issues of the same part, B, C, and D. And we can see that D is work in progress, but it's not reserved by anybody. So now within the web interface, we can either use the mini burger menu here to say reserve to folder, and that's obviously acting only on this particular one. Or you could select multiples and reserve all to folder. So single or multi-select in the web interface. I'm going to deselect that because I don't want to do it that way. I want to say I need to reserve this to a folder. These are my folders. The ability, I'm going to reserve it to the task that I created for this demonstration. So this is my task here, and I'm going to say reserve. So this item is now reserved by Stuart McBurney in this task here. If I look at the item, clearly I can see in the where used that it's also visible in this folder, but it's reserved inside this task. So we're building those relationships. Here we can see the attribute reserved in and reserved by. So I'm just going to hop back to here. The next action is the ability to edit items in the web. Now this is not CAD management, it's not document management, but the ability to modify attributes against things. So I've done the reserve, and clearly when you're reserving something, you can only reserve it to one folder or action because only one thing can be in control. But if you're referencing an item to a folder or an action, it can be referenced to many, and that's supported as well. I'm going to set this one to complete. The next enhancement, which is 7956, and by the way, in your workbook, I think one of these was duplicated, so you will see the same thing twice, but I've removed it from here. We'll blame Sandra for that. So the ability to edit items. If I go back to the web, because I've now reserved this and it's work in progress, and I've got the necessary access controls, I can start to edit the fields. Joe demo. Clearly you would type intelligent things, but I'm just going to start updating some of the information. Maybe this isn't correct and I want a space there between the millimeters, and I can edit the attributes now. Very useful in the web. Okay. Also, if I wanted to change the category, we have the icon for the category selector, and it takes me into the category browser, so I can start to structure through and select the category that I want. For example, I'm going to cancel because that would be wrong in this instance, and then cancel. Okay. So this is the ability to edit items through the web interface. We've been able to do this with folders for a year or two, I think. But we are continuing to move the web client forward so that apart from CAD loading and saving, we want you to be able to do as much as you possibly can within the web client as well, always subject to your access controls. So I'm going to set this as complete. The next one is the ability to create items in the web. I'm going to use the example here of I want to create some duct tape. I'm going to go to the web and I've got this duct tape that I want to create here. I'm going to grab the description, copy, go back to the web. We've got it open here. If I go to the very top of the screen here, create new item. Again, subject to your access controls. I want to create a part record. I'm going to choose my number. I want a default part number. This obviously will show you your auto numbering options. I'm just going to choose a default part number. The description that I've just copied. Oh, I don't like all capitals, but we'll ignore it for now. I want to reserve this again into my folder. Ability to create items, reserve to that folder. I want to put this in a category. It's a part, it's purchased, and it's a form of adhesive. Is it an adhesive or not? Okay, everybody understands anyway. I can drag this splitter bar down, filled in all of my attributes. You can add keywords and comments, but I am now in a position to create that item. Okay, so I've created it. It's work in progress. So at this point, if I wanted to keep a record of where I get the information for that part, I could hop back here, go to my custom attributes, click in here, and I'm pasting the details of the web page where I got the information from. So clearly in the web interface, it automatically supports any of your custom attributes as well. So the ability to, where are we? The ability to create items inside the DDM web interface. Complete. And the next web one, and we'll take questions after this next web piece of the puzzle, is the ability to change the status of items, which is good if you're checking or releasing things for people and you're not at your office desk. I have this reserved for modification, and therefore I am in a position where I could set, if I just say all okay, I've now updated the status of this to checked and approved. Okay, it's still reserved by me because they're the rules I've got in place. If I was releasing this, and say it's released, my rules are that at the point when you release something, it will unreserve it at the same time. So the ability to create items, edit items, reserve and reference items into folders, and the ability to change status on items as well, all within the DDM web client. I think they're great enhancements to the tool, and we will continue to move this functionality forward. So, where am I up to? Change the status of an item in the web, which is what we've just done. Complete. The next enhancement, DDMC 9448, is a general enhancement. Would like to be able to drop emails into the DDM interface. It's a very small enhancement, but I particularly like this. If I, for example, let's drop it on the main interface. Here's my main DDM interface. Now, historically, I'm hoping you're all familiar with this little monitoring tool at the bottom. If I say always visible, will it appear? The trouble is I've got such a high-res screen, it's probably lost its position. So if I make this a hover bar and I move that hover bar to here, what I've got now, if I open my Outlook, historically to get an email from Outlook, here we have an email from Peter Woodford. You had to drag it and drop it on this little drop zone in the bottom here, which is okay, but it was a little bit of a faff because we don't need that anymore. So you can completely ignore that. Let me just turn it off. It's interesting, it didn't turn it off at all. So hide, there you go. What I can now do is from Outlook, I can grab and drop it straight onto the DDM interface. I don't need to drop it into the drop zone. I can also, if I want to, if I'm looking at a folder, I can also drop it straight into my folder as well. So both options available. I'm going to drop it on the main interface. I've got my DDM configured so that when I drop, if I select this, there's the attachment. First of all, I'm going to drop the whole email. So if I drop the email, it's now imported it, and my DDM is configured to give it an automatic number and use the subject title as the description. So I'm not prompted to fill in the attributes at that point in time. Okay. You also have the option, and by the way, this email, if I open the email, has the attachment in it. It's the entire email. However, if I only wanted to bring the attachment in, I can drag the attachment and bring that in as its own file, which is a picture of me and my family. Okay. So you don't need to drop it on the widget, and you can drop an email or the attachments straight onto the DDM interface. I think it just makes life an awful lot easier and more straightforward. Okay, I'm actually going to delete those out of my database because I don't want those in there, like so. Okay, go back to here and back to my action list. So dragging and dropping emails and attachments, we've made it a lot easier, hopefully a lot more intuitive as well. Advanced category. Would like the advanced search to remember the size and the position of the splitter bar. And I believe I asked for this one because lots of saved searches. So let me say, for example, if I say this one, inquiry, I've got this configured as the results of a simple filter search on the word inquiry against all customer projects, and I've added it to my favorites. So when you're using the free search like this, it's very easy. However, if I say, well, let me say inquiry, copy. If I want to do this via an advanced search, and I want to be more specific, let's say where the state is equal to inquiry, add a row, or the state is equal to, let's say, evaluation, or the state is equal to qualification, and one final one where the state is equal to pending. So these are all pre-order states when we talk about a customer project. These are all sales-based states. So it might be that I want to query across all of these in one go, and therefore in my search results I've got the various qualification, pending, inquiry. I've got my results. Now previously, if you save that search, it did not remember that position of the splitter bar, and I'm a little bit on the fussy side because I like it to be positioned about there. So if I then add that to my favorites, and I'm just going to call this test, and I add that, if I clear the screen, go back to the free search, if I do something completely different, like let's say, for example, where were we again? We were on sales on hold. So we've done something completely, there aren't any, that's handy, long term. If I now go to my test, it jumps me to the search, but it's remembered the position of the splitter bar, which is just optimizing the screen real estate that I've got to look at the results. So it's a minor thing, but there are all these things where I don't like to keep dragging bars and dropping them all over the place. So, complete. Dynamic filter, advanced category dynamic filter. A very new, powerful, advanced search capability. We did have a workshop, a focus workshop on this, but for anybody who either can't remember or needs a refresher or hasn't seen it, what this is I'm going to clear the screen and go back to here. Now, our categories give us the ability to find things. Let me just minimize this lot up. I'm looking for a part. Okay. Manufactured, mechanical. I'm looking for a shaft. We have the ability here that when we see there's this new option called advanced search here, and we can do an advanced search based on that category across all item types or specific to parts, assemblies, drawings and documents. Okay. If I edit this category, we have the ability to say, is this advanced category searchable, yes or no? And should we include child categories in the search? Well, in the case of a shaft, there are subcategories that contain 217 items. So I'm assuming that yes, we would want to do that. Okay, which is why I've got them switched on here. So you can't assign things to these categories, you can't search on them, but they are available as an advanced category search. So if I was looking for a shaft and I say advanced category search, it jumps me to the advanced Boolean based search tool. It puts the first attribute automatically in place as a shaft. I'm going to jump my preview pane to the side here so I see more results. Okay. Now, what it also does is based on the category that I've selected, it also shows me all of the custom attributes that relate to that category. Now, if I show you the results, because I've got my system, there's a couple of switches here, add or remove category columns in the search results. I've got this switched on. So all of these attributes that relate to this type of object have been switched on in the window below. So I can see all of them in the table. Okay. I've also got it switched on to automatically run a search when I change my selection. If you have a very, very large database, you might want to be a little bit cautious about doing this. Okay, so definitely test it. And I want it to remember the settings because I always want it to work in this way. Now, the beauty of this is, if you're trying to find things, this tool allows you to filter your search results, and therefore you should always have a result at the end of your search. I've added two attributes here called diameter and length. Now, some of them don't have diameter and length, but if I do this, we can see that we've got 70, 20, and 15. There are 3 different diameters available within the results that we have. If I go to the diameter attribute here, we see those 3 options. If I choose I'm only interested in 70mm diameter, again, what it's done there is it's filtered down my results to only show me things that are 70mm, and therefore I can see what my length options are. So you need to think about it and how that would apply to your business, but it's super powerful. The ability to say, I'm looking for a lamp. I only want 3 watt. I only want an MR16 connection. I only want a 3000 color temperature. You know, the ability to start filtering through in this way. I think it's a super powerful tool. It's called the Advanced Category DF Enabled. DF for Dynamic Filter, which is not the real reason for calling it DF, but I'm not going to tell you. But this actually came from a customer as a request, and I think it's fantastic. And I think if you've got big databases and you want people to be able to trawl through huge amounts of data using this filtering mechanism, I think it's brilliant. So cool. So, and by the way, if I clear the screen, if I choose category as my first search inside the advanced search capability, it will automatically put me in this mode. So if I clear the screen, this is standard advanced search, or I could just say, show me everything in a particular business unit. In the defense business unit, for example, I can only see 2 things. But if you choose category as the first, it will put you into this dynamic filter mode, and you should be able to follow your nose. Okay. Dynamic filter. Complete. And any feedback on it will be, greatly received. So, 9122 advanced category would like the latest issue setting on searches to be ignored from reset and removal. Right. Again, this is a very minor change, but for me, it makes it much easier and much more intuitive as well. You're probably all familiar with the fact that we have the ability to, in the top right-hand corner, switch on latest issues. So if I'm looking for, this is switched off at the moment, and therefore, if I look at my standard bearing housings, what I'm seeing is 501 bearing housings because I'm seeing all of the old issues in my search result. If I now switch this on, I only see the latest issue. Now, we've always been able to do this. The difference now is you don't have to go into your tools, options, prompts to re-enable that change. Oh no, sorry, searches. It was in searches. Where are we? There was an option in here that says default to latest issue. So every time you wanted to toggle it on and off, you had to go and find it in here. Whereas now, if you turn it on, it's on, and it will stay on until you turn it off, which is much, much easier. Any questions on that? Or does anybody think that that's the wrong use model? I'd be curious, because it's something that used to trip me up all the time, and it was a bit of a faff. So I thought, well, no, hold on. We'll just turn it on, and if it's on, it's on, and if it's not on, it's not on. It's simple. So I can see no more questions on that. Let me go back to my list, which is this. Complete. Okay, so I've only picked on 20 enhancements out of the 89, and some of them are very small things, but they might be significant to you. Again, the release notes are available on the website. If you need assistance with your upgrade, contact the support department or your sales rep. Okay, your account manager. I shouldn't call it a sales rep, should I? Your account manager, your account executive, whatever we call it these days. And clearly we're going to help you out and walk you through the process of that happening. If there are any things that are in the release notes that we've not covered today, I'm more than happy to go through those with you. More than happy. It's a very important part of what we do, is the constant development to make the product better for you. And if we're getting it wrong, we need to know. So definitely contact your account executive, we'll call it, if you do want to have a meeting. And these things might only take 10 minutes or half an hour online. I'm more than happy to do it. Okay, so they're the topics I wanted to cover. Thank you to all of our customers. I think it's a great release. There's a lot more than I've shown you today, so do read the release notes. Make sure you get upgraded. And if you want to know any details or have anything demonstrated, please do come and ask. And thanks to my team as well. Thank you, everybody.